Hello travelers, I'm Chris, welcome to Lorespire. In this video, I'm going to show you how I built Nenio as a scroll savant wizard. This build is highly effective on core difficulty or lower and feels right for Nenio in my opinion. This video gives detailed explanations for everything that is used in this build, including advice on how to use the Metamagic feats that we choose, and how to slot Nenio's spells during your playthrough. This is the first in what will be a series of companion and main character videos that will eventually be linked together in future videos to make full party builds. There are timestamps, so you can skip around if you like. Let's start by looking at Nenio's ability point and skill point allocation. Of course, we can't change the starting stats of companions even by respeccing them, but we can control where we put the ability points Nenio gains as she levels. This is how Nenio's level 20 ability point allocation should look. The first 4 ability points Nenio gains as she levels, of course, go into intelligence, with the final ability point going into dexterity, which will leave her with the ability scores you see on screen. This is how Nenio's skill points should be allocated at level 20. Skill point allocation can be done to fit your party's needs, but if you're interested in the full party build aspects of this video series, you should stick with what is shown here. Regardless of what you do with your skill points, I would suggest definitely keeping Use Magic Device maxed out to take advantage of Nenio's class abilities, which give bonuses to use magic device checks and bonuses when using scrolls. You can see here that I keep Knowledge Arcana, Knowledge World, Lore Nature, and Perception maxed out as well, and I give them priority in the order listed there as Nenio levels. Nenio's extra skill points went to Mobility to gain the additional bonus that you get from defensive fighting in case Nenio needs to fight defensively, and because no other skills could be made high enough for Nenio to reliably pass checks in those skills. These are Nenio's martial stats. I'm not going to go over all of them because these aren't really that important for a wizard. You can pause the video now if you want to review everything. I will point out here that these saves for Nenio are 16 Fortitude, 16 Reflex, and 18 for her Will save. Along with Nenio's hit points and armor class, her saves are her weakest feature, so it's important to keep her out of harm's way as much as possible. These saving throw scores do include a bonus from Cloak of Resistance, but do not include any bonuses from buff spells. Through the use of buff spells, you can of course get these numbers much higher than shown here. Now let's take a look at Nenio's character sheet. Everything before level 4 is preset and can't be changed. The most notable of these are the Spell Focus Illusion and Spell Penetration feats. Given that Illusion is Nenio's specialist school and that she already has Spell Focus Illusion, we'll be sticking with Illusion feats and adding in bonuses to Evocation spells, specifically the Electricity spells from the Evocation school. Other noteworthy abilities that Nenio begins with are Scroll Focus, which adds half of Nenio's class level to use magic device checks. Arcane Bond, which allows Nenio to regain the use of 1 expanded spell each day. And Scribe Scrolls, which allows Nenio to create scrolls when resting as long as you have the materials for the scroll and a scroll scribing kit. Last, we have Specialist School Illusion. This gives Nenio 1 extra spell slot per spell level that can only be used for illusion spells. It also gives Nenio the Blinding Ray special ability, which can be used as a standard action to make a ranged touch attack. If the attack hits, the enemy is blinded for 1 round unless they have more hit dice than Nenio's wizard level, in which case they are dazzled for 1 round per level instead. This ability can be useful early on, but it becomes much less useful as the game progresses. Nenio will also get the Invisibility Field ability at level 8, which allows Nenio to become invisible as a swift action for a number of rounds per day equal to her wizard level. This invisibility functions as greater invisibility, making it a useful tool for survival when Nenio is targeted by enemies. Nenio's opposition schools are Abjuration and Necromancy. Yes, Necromancy, not Necromancy. Nenio can still cast spells from these spell schools, but preparing spells from these spell schools takes up 2 spell slots instead of just 1. That is a pretty big negative effect, and I suggest not using spells of these schools with Nenio. At level 5, Nenio gets the Scroll Specialization ability, which lets Nenio use her Intelligence modifier instead of the minimum modifier that would be needed to cast a spell of that level. This will make using scrolls significantly more effective, and after gaining this skill, Nenio should be the party member using scrolls, especially offensive scrolls, whenever reasonably possible. At level 10, Nenio gets the Scroll Mastery ability, allowing her to use her own caster level instead of the scroll's caster level whenever she uses a scroll. Again, this makes scrolls much more effective, and Nenio should be the party member using them whenever possible. At level 15, Nenio can choose a bonus wizard feat. I suggest choosing Metamagic Empower Spell. This allows us to increase the damage of Nenio spells without drastically increasing the spell level. At Mythic rank 9, we'll be taking the Mythic ability Favorite Metamagic, with Empower Metamagic as the choice, which will allow us to use Empower Metamagic while increasing the spell level by 1 instead of 2, which is very useful for this build in the late game. At level 20, you'll get to choose another bonus wizard feat for Nenio. You'll likely be very near the end of the game by this time, and won't really need any more Metamagic or other available feats, so I suggest taking combat casting here. It can help in cases where you're unable to protect Nenio. Now for Nenio's feat choices. These are in the order I've chosen them. Greater Spell Focus Illusion, Greater Spell Penetration, Lightning Reflexes, Metamagic Heightened Spell, Elemental Focus Electricity, Greater Elemental Focus Electricity, Great Fortitude, and Improved Great Fortitude. Greater Spell Focus Illusion raises the DC of Nenio's illusion spells, making enemies less likely to save against them. Greater Spell Penetration gives Nenio an additional +2 bonus to overcome spell resistance, so her spells will have an effect on enemies. Lightning Reflexes helps out with Nenio's reflex save. These are the most likely saves for Nenio to have to make if you are protecting her properly and keeping her away from combat. Metamagic Heightened Spell will allow Nenio to raise the DC of her illusion spells by increasing their level, keeping the best of these spells viable for the entirety of your playthrough. Elemental Focus and Greater Elemental Focus Electricity will help Chain Lightning, Storm Bolt, Lightning Bolt, all of the electricity spells deal more consistent damage. Great Fortitude and Improved Great Fortitude boost Nenio's Fortitude saves, which becomes very important toward the end of the game whenever enemies will be testing your entire party with spells that require Fortitude saves. Now let's check out Nenio's Mythic feats and abilities. Nenio receives Bypass Epic Damage Reduction, as every Mythic character does. Nenio's Mythic feats in order are Expanded Arsenal Magic School Evocation, Spell Focus Mythic Illusion, Spell Penetration Mythic, School Mastery Illusion, and Lightning Reflexes Mythic. Expanded Arsenal Magic School Evocation. Okay, So this is going to add all of the bonuses that Nenio's illusion spells receive from feats and mythic feats to her evocation spells as well. So spell focus illusion, greater spell focus illusion, spell focus mythic illusion, and school mastery illusion will all apply to Nenio's evocation spells as well as her illusion spells by taking this mythic feat. Spell focus mythic illusion. Given the build that we have going here, this is going to effectively increase the DC of all of Nenio's evocation and illusion spells by 2. Spell penetration mythic. This adds half of Nenio's mythic rank to checks made to overcome spell resistance. School mastery illusion. This increases the caster level of all of Nenio's illusion spells by 1, and of course this is extended to her evocation spells. In effect, this adds extra damage dice to damage spells and gives a bonus to overcoming spell resistance for spells of these 2 schools. Lightning Reflexes Mythic will allow Nenio to roll the dice twice every time she makes a reflex saving throw, and she gets to use the better result. Very, very useful in keeping Nenio. Nenio's mythic abilities are Abundant Casting, Improved Abundant Casting, Ascendant Element Electricity, Greater Abundant Casting, and Favorite Metamagic Empower. All 3 of the Abundant Casting mythic abilities combined will give Nenio 4 more spell casts per day for every single spell level. That's an additional 36 spells at level 17, which is just so incredibly useful. We can't help but make good use of this. Ascendant Element Electricity allows Nenio's electric damage to bypass spell resistance and spell immunity. Combine this with the fact that lightning spells deal damage even if the enemy succeeds in their saving throw, and Nenio will be able to deal reliable damage to nearly any enemy in the game. Favorite Metamagic Empower. This reduces the level increase of the Empower Metamagic feat from 2 to 1. This, along with the Abundant Casting mythic abilities, will allow Nenio to cast large numbers of Chain Lightning spells and Stormbolt spells that are both empowered and unempowered to do consistent damage in every fight. Now let's go over Nenio's spells. I will not be reviewing every spell here, that would just take too long. The spells that I think are useful and the ones that I actually used with Nenio are the spells we're going to go over. I'm not going to describe what the spells do, but the descriptions will be on screen for you to read in case you aren't familiar with them. I will be giving you suggestions on how to use each spell, and you'll see what spells I'm using in the end game as we cycle through each spell level. There are loads of spells that you could choose with Nenio, but I promise you that using the spells I suggest in the way that I suggest is effective. Any spells you see, but I don't specifically mention, can be traded out for any other spells you like without detriment to the build. Some spells will be mentioned at several spell levels due to the use of Metamagic. Level 1 spells. Mage Armor, Magic Missile, and Color Spray are the best spells here. You might use Enlarge Person as well if you don't have someone else to cast it. Now, let's see. Mage Armor is useful, but only up until you find a pair of bracers of armor +4 or higher for Nenio. Magic Missiles is pretty low damage, but it's very reliable damage, and once enemies are too high of a level for Color Spray to be effective against them, one cast of Mage Armor and a whole bunch of Magic Missiles are the only level 1 spells that you are likely to need. Color Spray is extremely effective in the early game, and having multiple Color Sprays prepared is a good idea when you first get Nenio in your party. However, it will lose its effectiveness pretty quickly. Once enemies start consistently saving against it, replace it with more Magic Missiles. Level 2 spells. Create Pit, Blur, Fox's Cunning, and Mirror Image. These are all very useful. Create Pit is extremely useful to control the battlefield early on. This spell makes Nenio the MVP of the Defender's Heart Siege battle pretty much every time I fight it. It does lose its effectiveness fairly quickly though. Blur. This is useful for a large part of the game, but in the last few acts, so many enemies have true seeing that it is a lot less effective. But even then, it's worth using if for no other reason than that there is not a better alternative. Fox's Cunning. This is useful to keep Nenio's intelligence buffed. It isn't necessary if you have items equipped that are giving her a +4 or more enhancement bonus to intelligence, but if you don't, you'll want to keep this spell up on her at all times. And last, we have Mirror Image. This is pretty much always helpful, especially since Nenio's survivability is pretty low and ambushes can be really tough on her. This will help out a lot with that. Level 3 spells. Lightning Bolt, Greater Magic Weapon, Haste, and Displacement are all very useful. Lightning Bolt is useful against enemies that aren't immune to electricity, and once you get the Ascendant Element Electricity mythic ability, this feat gives Nenio a reliable low-level source of damage. However, this spell can damage your allies, so you'll have to adjust Nenio's position to get good use of it, but as long as you're using haste and are not in a cramped corridor, repositioning should not be too difficult. Greater Magic Weapon is helpful early when your other spellcasters do not have enough spell slots to cast it enough times to cover your entire party's needs. Displacement is very helpful early on, but the farther you progress in the game, the less useful it becomes as more enemies will have true seeing. Still, even in the late game, it can be useful enough at times to keep a few slots equipped or prepared with it. And we have Haste. Now this might be the very best buff in the game. Well, probably not, but it's definitely the best low-level buff in the game and stays relative for the entire game. You'll want to use it for every difficult fight, and once you have enough spell slots available, you'll probably get to where you're using it in all fights. Level 4 spells. Dimension Door, Heightened Level Haste, Greater Invisibility, Phantasmal Killer, and Rainbow Pattern. Dimension Door is helpful for getting out of danger, navigating puzzles, skipping athletics checks or mobility checks in certain situations, and is convenient to have in Illusionera. Heightened Level Haste is mostly for later in the game when Rainbow Pattern and Phantasmal Killer have lost their effectiveness. This is the best level to heighten haste to in my opinion, and doing so is just to give us more uses of it so it can be in effect for as many battles as possible. Greater Invisibility can be helpful for sneaking around enemies if you have the need, or for staying out of danger, but I honestly don't think that I ever used it, or at least not in a meaningful way. Phantasmal Killer. Now this is very, very useful when you first get it. And even in the late game, with this build, you can start a fight by casting Phantasmal Killer and occasionally get a kill. And even if you don't get a kill, you're just starting the fight with it, so it didn't really cost you much at that point. And last, we have Rainbow Pattern. Now, Rainbow Pattern is pretty good whenever you first get it, you know, in Act 2, but in Act 3, it's going to start to lose its effectiveness, and probably by the middle of Act 3, or definitely by the end, you won't be using it much, if at all. Level 5 spells: Cone of Cold, Fire Snake, Empowered and/or Heightened Lightning Bolt, Heightened Phantasmal Killer, Phantasmal Web, and Shadow Evocation. Cone of Cold. This is a useful spell with which to start a battle. Okay, it can also hit your allies, so you probably don't want to use it in battle, too often, and it does cover a pretty large area. Okay, but the main reason that it's here is because there aren't as many enemies that have cold resistance or immunity as some other elements like electricity. Even so, I wouldn't devote too many slots to using this spell, and I would definitely replace all spell slots that contain Cone of Cold with Heightened Phantasmal Killer as soon as you get the Heightened Metamagic. Fire Snake. Now, this will help Nenio deal damage during fights whenever you first get it, even though the targeting graphic shows that it affects both enemies and allies. It will only damage enemies, so don't worry about that. Okay, and again, as soon as you get the Heightened Metamagic, I would replace this with Heightened Phantasmal Killer. Empowered and/or Heightened Lightning Bolt. Okay, this should probably replace your Heightened Phantasmal Killer spell as enemies start to get high enough will saves that Heightened Phantasmal Killer at this level is no longer affecting them, or at least not affecting them consistently. Alright, so phase out Phantasmal Killer with Lightning Bolt when Phantasmal Killer becomes ineffective. Phantasmal Web. Now, this is good for crowd control in the mid-game. It's possible to get lucky with it later in the game, but it should probably only be used in the late game if you have already exhausted all of your better crowd control spells, or if crowd control really isn't critical for the fight that you're in. And last, we have Shadow Evocation. This spell gives you some versatility by letting you choose which damage spell is best for the situation. It can be useful whenever you first get it because enemies aren't likely to save against it very often. I wouldn't commit more than 1 or 2 spell slots to it whenever you first get it, and I would definitely phase it out for Phantasmal Killer as soon as you get your Heightened Metamagic. Level 6 spells: Chain Lightning, Cold Ice Strike, Heightened Phantasmal Killer, and Phantasmal Putrefaction. Chain Lightning. Now, this will become Nenio's main source of damage when you get it. It won't be possible to use as Nenio's only level 6 damage spell, at least not until you get Ascendant Element Electricity at Mythic rank 5, but that shouldn't be too long after you gain access to this spell anyways. And Chain Lightning will actually remain relevant and at least do semi-significant damage even into the late game. Now, Cold Ice Strike. This spell is pretty much only here as an alternate source of damage until you get Ascendant Element Electricity for Chain Lightning. Fewer enemies are resistant or immune to cold damage, so you can use this whenever enemies are immune to lightning damage. Also, this spell can be cast as a swift action, which does allow you to cast 2 spells in the same turn with Nenio when you're using this, which is helpful, but I would still trade it out for Chain Lightning once you get the Ascendant Element Mythic ability. Heightened Phantasmal Killer. Now, killing an enemy is pretty much always helpful, and this spell is especially helpful before Nenio gets her Ascendant Element Mythic ability, which you can see is kind of a theme here. You know, pretty much once you get that, you want to maybe not, you don't want to put all of your spell slots as Chain Lightning, at least not until the very end game. But at first, you would just want to have most of them and then have the rest filled with Phantasmal Putrefaction. Anyways, speaking of Phantasmal Putrefaction, this is actually extremely useful. Nenio's best crowd control spell, in my opinion, until she gets weird at level 9. And I suggest filling most of your level 6 spell slots with this whenever you first get access to level 6 spells. And as it becomes less and less useful, and of course you get your Ascendant Element Electricity at Mythic Rank 5, you'll start replacing it with more and more uses of Chain Lightning. Level 7 spells: Heightened and or Empowered Chain Lightning, Heightened Phantasmal Killer, and Heightened Phantasmal Putrefaction. So, Chain Lightning. Now, this will have to be heightened until you reach Mythic Rank 9, at which time Empowered Chain Lightning is preferred. Heightening this won't increase the damage, but it will increase the DC. You should be getting Ascendant Element Electricity around the same time you get access to level 7 spells. However, I would dedicate more spell slots to Heightened Phantasmal Putrefaction than Chain Lightning until you get Greater Abundant Casting at Mythic Rank 7, at which point I would fill most spell slots with Chain Lightning. Heightened Phantasmal Killer. When you first get access to level 7 spells, having one spell slot dedicated to this spell can be helpful to deal with unexpected enemies during ambushes. That being said, Heightened Phantasmal Putrefaction will often be more helpful in those situations, so I would not dedicate any more than one spell slot to Heightened Phantasmal Killer. And if you just want to use all of them for Phantasmal Putrefaction, that's viable. Speaking of which, Heightened Phantasmal Putrefaction will be your best crowd control, and it's very helpful in group fights and everything, you know, all of that. I would be dedicating several level 7 spell slots to this spell, at least until you get weird at level 9, at which time I would do something similar to what you see here, which is replace all of them except for the favorite school slot with Chain Lightning. Level 8 spells: Heightened Phantasmal Putrefaction and Storm Bolts. Heightened Phantasmal Putrefaction is of course here for crowd control. I suggest having a couple of level 7 and level 8 spell slots dedicated to Phantasmal Putrefaction until you get access to level 9 spells. Once you do have access to level 9 spells, you can go ahead and keep Phantasmal Putrefaction in your favorite school spell slots only for spell levels 6, 7, and 8, and use the weird spell that you get at level 9 for the rest of your crowd control needs. Okay, now, Storm Bolts is probably Nenio's best source of damage. It isn't the greatest single target damage dealer, but it does good, reliable AoE damage that's very useful for large, powerful groups of enemies, which will be commonplace towards the end of the game, and for swarms, which are less common, but can be very annoying without reliable AoE damage. Also, it is good enough single target damage when it needs to be. And I would like to point out here that it does stun the enemies if they fail their fortitude saving throw. So that means that it doubles as a type of crowd control, which is definitely useful. Level 9 spells: Heroic Invocation, Empowered and or Heightened Storm Bolts, and Weird. Heroic Invocation can be helpful for Nenio to have if no one else in your party can cast this or Greater Heroism. Personally, I think using Greater Heroism on each party member with someone who has access to that is a better option than Heroic Invocation. However, if that isn't available to your party, this is kinda sorta almost as good, and it's in AoE, so you only need to use one spell slot instead of one spell slot per party member, as you would have to do if you were casting Greater Heroism on each party member. Empowered or Heightened Stormbolts. This will be used with Heightened Metamagic until you get the favorite Metamagic Empowered Mythic ability at Mythic rank 9. After that, you should start using Empowered Metamagic with Stormbolts. I would fill about half of Nenio's level 9 spells, spell slots with Stormbolt spells. And last, we have Weird. This is probably Nenio's best spell, and it's definitely her best crowd control spell, and the best spell against common enemies that are not immune to this type of spell. It's great for ambushes, and it's great to use against large groups of enemies. Sometimes you can actually start a battle with this spell, and even if there's 7 or 8 enemies, you might kill 5 or 6 of them at times, you know, so it's definitely extremely helpful. And I would dedicate about half of Nenio's level 9 spell slots to this spell in most situations. Okay, now I hope that you enjoyed this video and that this build for Nenio helps you out in your playthrough. Remember to subscribe to the channel because there will be a whole series of these videos covering most companions with some player character builds mixed in as well, and we'll be building entire parties from these build videos once enough characters have been covered. Anyways, this has been Chris with Lorespire. Be well, my friends.